Dear Lord, thank you for the blessings that we have received to to be blessed to be able to come together with the technology that we have. As imperfect as it is wonderful to be able to join together. We thank you for this opportunity and the time that we live in. We ask that we receive a special blessing as we continue to review studies that have been done, the studies that will guide us and direct us, a midnight cry, all the way to the second advent. We ask for a blessing to understand methodology as we put our minds to the test, as we struggle and we grapple with understanding and applying these methodologies. We ask for a special blessing that we may understand and comprehend the events that we are walking through ourselves. We thank you for hearing our prayers, and we ask for a special blessing in Jesus' name. Amen. So we are doing a review of a study that Elder Tess has done, and I am just trying to bring it up on my computer. 1 second. It is a study that was done back in 2022. So at the very beginning of 2022, Elder Tess has done a presentation. So it's the first of the first. Where can I write here? Right up here. So first of the first in 2022, and Elder Tess is doing this presentation. What she wants to do is she wants to look back at the events of 2021. So we're standing here in 2022. This is us when this presentation is being done. This is Elder Tess talking to us. She wants to look back at the events that took place in the year of 2021. And if anyone has any questions or would like to clarify anything, please feel free to speak up and ask away. And the events that she lists through, she starts with January 6. So 2021, she's looking back. And mentions January 6. And then jumps down to December 27th. So December 27. So this encapsulates a whole year, but there's two particular dates there that she wants to point out. And she focuses on themes. So she'll mention the King of the North, democracy. These are under the, so consider this a title, King of the North. And under this title, there's going to be two subjects. There's going to be democracy, and there's going to be, she says, women's rights or gender equality. Then under the next tab, she's going to mention the King of the South. And the two themes that come up there is dictatorship and then spheres of influence. And then she'll go on to list some other things there. Conflict from the East and the West. And then separate from this is Afghanistan. And so she's going to bring up the point that we're looking back here in 2022 at the very beginning. We're looking back, we're looking at 2021, and we're going to take a look at these events. She doesn't mention January 6th as insurrection, but that's just one of those dates now that is quite common and sticks in our mind. It's like saying 9/11. It's one of those dates now that is fixed in our mind. So she mentions a broad year and she lists some of the things here. But one of the points I want to grab a hold of is just this first one here that's made: the King of the North, democracy, and gender equality. So at this point, it might feel like that nothing has changed for us, but we have exited this reform line. This is a reform line of the priests, if you weren't aware. And we are now finished with this reform line, and we've come up here to the line of the 144,000. This is where we're solely located. And the events that have taken place here in 2021 for us was the second advent. When we put these titles on here, second advent. And so when we come over here to the second advent of the 144,000, this, we know and understand that at this point, pretty much we're just waiting to be taken home, waiting to be taken back to heaven. So the information that is here in this year is not so much for the priests as it is for the 144,000. So this reform line that we have laid out here, given to us by Alan White, with the exception of these two waymarks here that we've changed, we understand of the increase of knowledge and the formalization within the message. 2021 becomes a formalization for the test leading to the Sunday law, and we have an increase in knowledge. With 2019. So these last two waymarks in the line of the priests are the increase of knowledge and the formalization that lead to the great test for the 144,000. It's just going to be a 1 minute delay. I just need to connect to the internet. Connection issues here as well. Does anyone have any questions or thoughts while I'm doing this? I didn't hear any questions and I can't see any chat there, so I will take it that no one has any questions, which is good because we just started. So she's gone through these list of studies here that make up the 1 year of 2021 key points, and made mention that these points aren't so much for the priests. These events that took place are for the 144,000. When we're sitting in 2021, we're at our second advent for priests, and there's nothing left for us to do. The test that we passed was a year prior in 2020, our formalisation. So this information that we're seeing, we're bringing this up to the 144,000. This becomes this message that we're receiving in this time period to help us understand this event here, the great test, the LART test, and what we call the Sunday law. So if we're thinking about this journey from 2001 on the line of the 144,000 up here to the Sunday law, these two waymarks here, we've got our formalisation, increase in knowledge, 2019, our formalisation, 2021, and our great test of 2024. I'll put July up there for you. So these reform lines are many, many things. They're a picture of how the message has developed, how we understand methodology. They're a depiction of events from the writings that we read and understand. It's all a complicated play of human events, but when we divide it up, then we're able to see more easily how the message has developed. Then we start to see the symmetry, and it makes it more manageable to be able to understand. So we've divided the line to see how we've experienced the increase in knowledge and the formalisation for the 144,000, and we experienced it very differently for us as priests. So there's two very different experiences that took place there. So 2018, elder test comes along. And gives a midnight cry message. I said before that in 2021, the year before, we had already passed or failed the test. The reason why we say that is the formalisation, we sit down and we write out the answers for the tests that we've sat. At the following waymark, you get your results, has been the basic parable that we've used to help explain it. So this period here, we had, this is rain, and this period here is latter rain. There is a message that comes to us in a former and a latter rain, or early rain and latter rain, that prepares us for a test that we're to face. Which is standard understanding for us. So these are messages. These are messages. Then when we get to the harvest time, we've got messages here too. So in 2019, we had a large group of people leave the movement. The reason why they left the movement is that 1 year earlier, at the midnight cry, they rejected that message, whatever that message is. Whatever part of that message that they couldn't deal with. So what I want us to see here is that this is where Elder Tess began to give the Midnight Cry message. And this is where these lines come into the large amount of lines that Elder Tess puts together come into play. Every line that you can think of comes into this point here. If you want to make it Acts 27, Pyrrhus, World War I, World War II, all these lines are drawn during this period from 2018 through to 2021. Almost every single line that's drawn is developed during this time. This had its purpose and point for the priests, but I also just want to point out, if you hadn't already seen it, that this information that we received here is the increase of knowledge, and it is the formalization for the Sunday law that we have reached now, 2024. So when we look at a history that's given to us by Ellen White, especially in the Great Controversy, it's a story that begins with the destruction of Jerusalem. She goes right back to the destruction of Jerusalem, talks about that briefly, then quickly moves on to the Reformation and people involved in the Reformation, and then brings the story to 1798, and then the reform line that we know, that we depict from Ellen White, which covers exactly the same thing as what our line depicts, with the exception of a change of dates at the beginning. So to see this history from 1798, there are hundreds of years through this, if we're to bring this all the way to 2024. And there are millions of events that take place, and we don't necessarily know where to look. And as we look at it now, most of what happens in these events from 1798 through to this time are what we would consider noise. It's information that we wouldn't use and take into consideration, a lot of it. One of the points that we often forget is that God always selects the very best people to represent their message, to give their message. So this movement, everyone in it right now at the present, is or are the very best people to take this message. So God is limited by the resources available, by the rules that are set in place that they have developed. So everyone in the movement, that's you and I, if you're struggling with that understanding. So a single parable or a reform line is not able to give us all the information that we need. This line that we had from Ellen White had too much information on it. It was spread over a large period of time, and you get lost in the mud or the noise. So we have a time of the end. We brought it closer to our beginnings at 1989, and we shortened it. And then we shortened it again to the priest line. And we were able to see more clearly the events that started to take place using good methodology and understand and comprehend the information. So what we do is we focus on two particular events in this study, 2014 and 2018. There are, as Elder Tess points out, there are three groups, and I won't share screen with you, but I will read out the quote. These are quite familiar quotes with them. We've been over them before. I think Elder Terry went over them a couple of weeks ago during her study. So this is a broadside, April 1, and broadside number 1, April 6 from 1846. And we're going to paragraph number 2 to start with. I'll just read this out. While praying at the family altar, the Holy Ghost fell on me, and I seemed to be rising higher and higher, far above the dark world. I turned to look for the Advent people in the world, but I could not find them. When a voice said to me, "Look again and look a little higher." As I raised my eyes and saw a straight and narrow path cast up high above the world. On this path, the Advent people were traveling to the city, which was at the farther end of the path. They had a bright light set up behind them, and at the first end of the path, which an angel told me was the midnight cry. So this is the main point that I want to bring out from this short paragraph. It's just this midnight cry of 2018. This is the light, as we know, that shines behind us all the way to the great city, the second advent. But on the reform line of the 144,000, you don't even see this marker, 2018. It's invisible to the story, but if you were to lay it on a date, 2018, it's here. Right before the increase of knowledge about the great test. And they had a bright light, I'll go back to reading the quote now. They had a bright light set up behind them at the first end of the path, which the angel told me was the midnight cry. The light shined all along the path and gave light for their feet so that they might not stumble. So that's a common quote. That's paragraph 2. We're just going to head down a little bit to paragraph 7 of the same article. It's a broadside 1, April 6, 1846, paragraph 7. And it says, in February of 1845, I had a vision of coming events with the midnight cry. I saw a throne and sat on it God and Jesus. I gazed on Jesus' countenance and admired his lovely person. The God I could not behold, for a cloud of glorious light covered them. I asked Jesus if God had a form like himself, and he said he had. But I could not behold it. For they said, if you should behold it, then the glory of God, you would cease to exist. Before the throne, I saw the Advent people, the church and the world. I saw a company bowed down before the throne, deeply interested, while most of them stood up, disinterested and careless. Those who were bowed before the throne would offer up their prayers and look to Jesus. Then he would look to God and appeared to be pleading with them. A light would come from God to Jesus and from Jesus to the praying company. Then I saw an exceeding bright light come from God to Jesus and from Jesus to, he waved it over the people before the throne. But few would receive the great light. Many came out from under it and immediately resisted it. Others were careless and did not cherish the light, and it moved off from them. Some cherished and went down and bowed with the little praying company. This company all received the light and rejoiced in it as their countenance shone with glory. So the points that we're pulling out from this article, this particular paragraph, is just that there's three groups of people within the movement at this 2018 Midnight Cry. And we see there those who accept, those who reject, and those who accept but do not cherish. So three groups. So from the beginning of this message, the elder Tess can see who these people are, and she goes to work. This time period is spent helping those people who don't cherish but accept what is being taught.
That's awesome.
So for anyone who's interested, we're going to read out the definition of cherish. That is to hold something dear. To protect and to care for someone lovingly. And to keep in one's mind. So they're the use of the word cherish. And you see that there in Elder Tessa's ministry. And in the information that was given, all these lines that I drew under here. This is the protection and the care and the example of cherishing the message that was shown, the example that was given to us. In understanding 2014, this point here, this is not a direct quote from Elder Terry, but it's Elder Tess, but it's using the same words. When we understand 2014, we're able to understand this test that was back here on the line of the 144,000, our great test. When we put it in a simple way, we divide up the line of the priests into two parts. One is from 1989 through to 2014, or the Sunday Law. And this is what Elder Terry touched on last time. This is the first section, and then this is the second section here. So from 1989 through to 2014, the work there to do is to accept the date. So before I said God has chosen the very best people available on this earth to study and understand the messages that are given. And the test is not easy. The test is never easy. There's a very high standard set. And for these first 14, however many years that is, 14, 20 years through to 2014, the job or the role that we have is to accept the date, to accept that 2014 is the Sunday law. And then the implications that come with accepting that or believing that. So those implications are going to be things like we're the final generation, that God is gathering the 144,000, that USA and Adventism are failing, that we're allowed to time set, and that we have reform lines. So when you look at those things, what you're doing is you're studying the methodology. To be able to see that you can time set, you need to be able to understand methodology and how to use it so that you can even believe that there is an ability to time set and set the time for 2014. You need to be able to have proof and evidence, use methodology to understand that you are the last generation, that God is gathering the 144,000 in the time that you live. And that the reform lines that you have are teaching and developing this understanding. So that's the work from 1989 through to 2014. Then from 2014 through to 2021, the work is to understand and accept the content that you're given. Now remember, when we're looking at parables, they're given in a neat, simple structure. But that structure is not always completely accurate to the history that you're walking through. She'll give you an example of the trumpet. She'll say the trumpet powers didn't happen exactly as we draw them on lines. And when we look at 2014, we didn't get the Midnight Cry message to 2018. We didn't start to understand it until 2019 forwards. So this first period here, we haven't done much with unpacking 2014. And if we did, what we started to look for was things like Obamacare or Hillary Clinton doing something wrong. We looked in the wrong areas and tried to find things that were not accurate, that were not right. So through this period, our job is to understand the events, of 2014. And she's going to go through a list of roughly 30 items that she's going to associate with 2014. And then go over that list and talk about what could we have spoken about in 2014 that would have been of any use. There's only 4 or 5 subjects out of those 30. So there's a list of 30 items here. And of these 30, we could have spoken about, she ticks 5. Maybe 5 we could have spoken about, but in speaking about them, we would have got them wrong. So you are not to unpack the events that were given to us in 2014 because you're going to make a mess of it. Once you receive this light and understanding from the lines and you get corrected, then you are able to unpack the events of 2014. She lists 30 events, as I said, but one she spends the most amount of time on. She spends 15 minutes talking about this one piece of information. And in 2014, that is the purging of moderates from the Republican Party. So this becomes the beginning of the transformation of the Republican Party. And they had lots of opportunities from 2014 onwards But this becomes this beginning. So purging of Republican Party. The next 2 points of the list of 30, she wants to speak first and say these are the three that are most important. Then she lets the rest of the chat decide and call out which ones are relevant. So the list of these three most important ones are the purging of the Republican Party, Mitch McConnell blocking the key judicial appointments for primary positions within as judges. And third is Hobby Lobby versus Burwell. This is the decision over contraception and how businesses interact with their staff. Both these, number 2 and number 3, Mitch McConnell blocking the appointments and Hobby Lobby, are very big, but the most amount of time she spends is within that purging of the Republican Party. The next biggest one after that is Gamergate. So Mitch McConnell, I think it's double L, and Hobby Lobby. And fourth is Gamergate. She makes these three first, but she spends more time on Gamergate than she does on Hobby Lobby and Mitch McConnell. So when we consider the Republican Party and 2014, they purged the people out of their party to make room for extreme thoughts and extreme ideas. So when you get rid of moderates, you are taking away reason and understanding in certain fields. And so what they've opened their way up as for let's say yes people who are happy to do anything, happy to accept whatever conspiracy theories are told, just to be able to do what is said. And we see that one of the key turning points for the Republican Party after 2014 is the impeachment. So they have a decision to make when Donald Trump is impeached. Would the party follow Donald Trump and then embrace his conspiracy theories? Or would they completely throw away, would they completely throw away their independence as a party and surrender to him? Or are they going to separate from him and stay conservative and distance themselves from Donald Trump and select a new leader? I'll just read something out to you in one of their decisions. So this is just a Wikipedia page. Trump is the third US president in history to be impeached and the first to be impeached without support for the impeachment from his own party. So there is a party who has made the decision to completely support Donald Trump. This hasn't happened before. Normally the party is designed to make sure that that person that they're selecting is going to be for the good of that country. And they've failed to do so at this point. So this becomes a really big turning point. when you've gone this far, when you've stood with them through that campaign, which is renowned for its conspiracy theories, it leaves you in a very embarrassed situation further down the line to be able to separate from Donald Trump and then those decisions that you've made, that they have made. So what God is doing is quite simple when you look at it as a parable. God raised up a movement who walks through their Sunday law period, their history from 2014 to 2021, and explains it to them through all these lines that have been developed by Elder Tess and Elder Parminder. The midnight cry is to prepare you to be able to see and understand the events that take place in 2024. It's a continual unpacking and understanding of 2014 that helps to shed light on particularly July of 2024, but then the cause and the effects of those things. So obviously you can't remove all doubt. No matter how much proof there is, doubt is always going to be there, and that's a challenge for each of us to overcome. And then doubt is removed by an understanding of methodology. So when applied correctly, methodology gives you the answers that you get, which are in these lines, which helps to dissolve the doubt. So from the test, the time of the end, our test has been and still is to this day gender. But if you're going to only look for issues that involve just gender equality, then you miss the overflowing flood of events that lead and wrap up and disguise gender inequality. And this is what we're seeing in the directions of the King of the North, or if you've watched Elder Terry's studies, the Sunday Law movement. This describes and defines what's taking place in America, what has taken place, and what is taking place currently, that can be more difficult to see without understanding the lines and methodology.
You taking questions?
Yeah, sure. Yep.
So with what you've just sort of laid out there, we've got 4 themes or 4 stories focusing on 2 stories that go from 2014, 2019, 2021, 2024. Is that what? So we're seeing the Republican Party as a story going through that history. You should be able to see them at the waymarks, and Gamergate, you should be able to see at the waymarks. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
As just a clarification question.
Yes. But Gamergate, if you go and Google Gamergate in 2024, you're not going to see any relevant or articles that apply now.
Yeah.
So what you need to do is see the principles behind Gamergate that are acting out very obviously in 2024.
Which would apply to the Republican Party as well. The principle, what's the goal there? What's the purpose of the purge?
That's right.
And you follow the purpose of that purge, and you follow that story through.
That's right.
And you follow the principle of that underlines Gamergate, which is this large group of not religious which we all thought it was.
So
Mostly male, Trinity-based group of people that we actually saw in July come to fruition.
yes. Yeah, you're not looking for Mitch McConnell to purge the Republican Party again. There's no point. That's done.
Yeah.
So you're seeing stepping stones in the advancement of a cause and effect relationship.
They're like movements, aren't they?
Yes.
The purge was a movement, and Gamergate's a movement, and it's developed and evolved.
Yeah.
And so we're saying in 2024, the evolution has got to such a level that it's spreading globally, or what do we? It's obviously, is it climaxing at that point, or what are we saying?
Well, you can't come back from it.
No, you can't.
Now, once that Republican Party elected their leader, there was already studies out there that said Donald Trump was going to be that final president.
Yeah.
So then that information's all there. It's what they did to get to that point that we're seeing and identifying. If that makes sense.
And Gamergate's part of that story, a large part of that story, why that has occurred.
So Steve Bannon found a disaffected group of people on the internet and took them and weaponized them, which is what we see in most of the areas here. It's a weaponization of things that are meant to be good. The Republican Party is meant to be good, but it's a weaponization of it. It's used in a different way. And I think in part it comes back to I'll just leave it at that. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Does anybody else have any questions or thoughts that they would like to add?
I just wouldn't mind commenting on the fact that it's just really interesting to see, looking back with hindsight, on what Elder Tess focused on and how relevant that is to July and Elder Terry's studies around the Sunday law, and how it's, unless you are keeping your eyes on the studies and the lines, you could see how you could miss it. But when you do see the lines and the studies of Elder Tess and you follow it all, it's like, to me, it just seems so obvious now. We couldn't see it then, but looking back, we can really see it, I think. Anyway, that was just my thought.
Thank you, Lynn. That's a good point. In this study that I was reviewing today, she says gender equality is going to be wrapped in something like, paraphrasing, wrapped in the issues of democracy. So she could see it way back then. She knew exactly what was taking place. I missed it when I viewed the video 5 times. And it wasn't until, for some reason, this year that I saw it and said, oh, wow, that was there the whole time. What's happened there?
It is amazing. It is incredible when you go back and you watch with new eyes, because we have that hindsight now. We can see things that we completely missed so many times, as you point out. And I think it's really relevant what you just said then about how the issues of gender are wrapped up in these issues of democracy, because I think that's also a reason people have missed things, because they're expecting the obvious, oh, it's all about gender. But indirectly, it actually is all about gender, but that's not what matters to them. That's like a secondary point. I mean, they have a place for women and all of that is included as their package. But for them, power and control, which is all part of the patriarchal system, is their main concern. Hence why they've got issues around things like the economy and things like immigration, because that's all about their national values and their control, not just of USA, but even really the world, indirectly at least at this point, and probably more so going forward. But it's just, you can sort of see how it's all a big package.
Thank you, Lee. I think the only thing I would add to what I said before was when she uses the word democracy, we didn't ask her how she would define democracy. So I think that'll be something that will be looked at in the future. Is that something like institutions? Do we then have a second way to define democracy? Because the standard dictionary definition is not going to suit well, because
Yes,
democracy
good point.
worked at 2024. Democracy did what it was meant, what it was supposed to do. So
I think that quote of John Adams, which talks about how democracy destroys itself, could be relevant to that. In other words, it's through its own means that it can actually destroy its own principles. So I think that's what we've seen in action. So it doesn't look like it's gone, it's there, but it's kind of destroying itself from the inside in a way, I guess you could say, but it's still there. It's still going to have a function, but the function will be controlled by the autocracy, as opposed to, it's going to be more like that than a democracy how it was once, a republican democracy. It's more of an autocratic democracy. Do you know what I mean? Anyway, we can discuss it later.
That's good. Thank you. Brendan?
Can I clarify, using my words, what Lynn said before you got onto the democracy side? So just correct me if I'm wrong, Lynn, you're saying, and I thought this, so gender issues or gender inequality is almost cloaked or as a consequence or a result of okay, let me just take a step back. I think there's people in the movement currently looking for a gender-based law or something like that, whereas that isn't what Tess was saying back then. She's saying it's cloaked or a result of the cause is, it's more of the result, whereas the cause is what we're seeing there, which is, I guess, the fall of the Republican Party. All these things are coalescing into the result being, which not many people are focusing on, gender inequality and problems. So the focus and the cause of all that is all the things we're talking about. Is that what you're saying? I'll be butchering it.
More or less. And I think when you look at the RNC, you could see that even though gender wasn't like the topic of discussion, you could see very clearly what their views on gender are. And even more recently, we've heard Trump talking about how, they're going to get rid of all this trans nonsense and get back to two genders and all of that sort of stuff. So even though they're not their main political platforms, they're clearly there. You can't not see them. They're in your face. The patriarchal system, the misogyny is all in your face, but they're not riding that as a platform. That's just a consequence of their whole
the far right
ideology.
Trinity.
Yeah. And that's part of that Gamergate. And you had to purge that Republican Party so that you could literally bring back an extreme, because it's an extreme. If you look at the RNC, it's really a misogynistic, patriarchal extreme. And that Gamergate fed that beautifully. So anyway, that was just my thoughts, like I say.
Thank you, Lynn. Terry?
So I'm wondering if we can see it as these represent institutions that their overthrow is going to cause the failure of feminism. So the Republican Party being purged and being totally taken over will bring on the failure of feminism. The Supreme Court, through what Mitch McConnell's activities and the Hobby Lobby, Gamergate, the role of media, the increase of the manosphere, all these things are going to exacerbate the failure of feminism. So gender equality is wrapped up in these things because the strengthening of this new order is just going to destroy those rights.
Yeah.
So is it like, so the same principle applies to Trump? These are institutions, and the restraint is coming off. And once the restraint comes off, your Hobby Lobby, your Supreme Court, your Republican Party, and the Gamergate group, once those restraints come off, i.e. would be feminism and I guess the ideals of saying you can't discriminate, you can't do this, all these restraints are coming off, and therefore what's manifesting is it's just naturally sexism is exacerbating because the restraints of these institutions have fallen, which makes perfect sense as I'm witnessing it on a personal level at work. I'm just hearing it's just emboldened. That's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing emboldened language. That makes perfect sense. Thank you.
And we can thank Trump for that.
Well, everyone likes to blame him anyway.
We could thank the whole Republican Party for that, could we not? But I see what you're saying. I mean, he's the mouthpiece.
I think she was being sarcastic.
Oh, okay, I see. Sorry, missed that.
So, in other words, there's lots of movements coming together to. I guess he's a figurehead. I remember Elder Tess said he's like he's like a figure, like a representative. He represents like that's, if you want to know what the Sunday law looks like, look at Donald Trump. But that he's not. It's all of that behind him. Which of these four? Okay.
He's a bit like a figurehead.
It's the Abel School.
Can I say something? I think the discussion has made it clearer to everybody, but my beginning thought before the discussion was they know that gender is, they know it's important, but they're not pushing that. They're pushing their goals and their agenda, the main goals, the main focuses, because once they achieve that, I think it would carry with it the gender issues. It would deal with all the rest of the things that they want to deal with, but they need to have focal points, focus. I don't know. That's very simply put.
Thank you, Josephine. We might close in prayer, and then if anyone's got anything else they would like to add, they can add it afterwards. So if you'd like to kneel with me, we'll close in prayer. Dear Lord, thank you for the opportunity to come together with the technology that we have. Thank you for the blessings of the midnight cry that help us to see the great test. We ask that we use the methodology clearly and concisely and in the correct order, that we may come up with the correct answers. We ask that you'll pour out your blessings upon us when we use it correctly and be a blessing to all our sphere of influence. We ask for the courage to address the questions that we have, to stand where we choose to stand on the issues that we see before us. And we thank you for hearing and answering our prayers. In Jesus' name, amen.